Hello and welcome back to the Nerd Impact podcast. Today we have two guests, recurring guests from our Berserk episode. We have Josh and Archie here today to discuss what's quite a new topic for Aidan, at least, but very familiar for the rest of us. That is, well, the Astartes short web series of animated shorts, which are absolutely fantastic and now available on Warhammer Plus, as we will get into. But I think this is just more of a jumping off platform for a wider discussion on the Warhammer 40K as a universe and also wider Warhammer discussion, because I think we're all consuming, we have for many years consumed a lot of the Warhammer content, be it fantasy or 40K, and that they are relatively intertwined. So yeah, I think if we just dive in, I guess. So Aidan, how did you find watching Astartes, as we did sort of choose it as a sort of, as I said, a best sort of jumping off platform for getting into the world?
I mean, you've sold me, that's for sure. I had no idea what it was until I actually started watching it, and kind of, again, I think even though I've never dealt with Warhammer before, mm-hmm. I've seen the aesthetics, I've seen the characters that you can have in it, so I kind of recognised it straight away. But it was completely different to what I thought it was going to be. But it was incredible. It was especially afterwards, I kind of had a look behind where it came from and so forth, and it's incredible that someone put that together, and
mm-hmm.
it was beautifully animated. Like at first I wasn't actually sure because it looks that clean. It's so good. I got some notes on it as we go along, but I was really impressed with it. Definitely, I think if you wanted to sell this to someone like myself who's never interacted with Warhammer before, this is the way to do it. I definitely today will be really interesting for me just to hear the lore a bit more about it, and kind of go from there. So I think really for you three, it's going to be talking about where it kind of impacted you and where it all started from.
And on that topic, I think Archie, do you want to go first in terms of how has Warhammer 40K sort of impacted you? Because I know it has I'll just put in as a foreknote, is that it was sort of the foundation for our friendship, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was dissect, to be honest. But
you seem to think that, but that's not how I remember things. That's not how I remember things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I honestly couldn't tell you how it started. I can't remember the specifics of it, but I discovered it at least in book form. Oh wait, no, I can't remember. There's this guy back in Greece called Fred, who was a friend of mine. He also was obsessed with RuneScape, but he was also a huge fan of Warhammer. And he did the models, which I didn't like. I didn't care about that, but I read his lore books, and the lore was just like nothing I'd ever experienced before, and it was just amazing. And I remember having arguments with him, because he'd be like, we'd be talking about like which fantasy army would win, and he'd always insist that every Warhammer army would wreck everything else. And I'd be like, no, the elves from Lord of the Rings would win, even though by nature of what Warhammer is, Warhammer cannot be beat, really. By design they're extreme, they're parodic of other things. They're designed to just be so ridiculously over the top that nothing compares. But anyway, as I was saying, then I brought it over to, I didn't bring it over, it was already in the UK. But anyway, I came over to the UK, and Nath was there at school, and I gave him the Space Wolves Omnibus.
The Space Wolves Omnibus, the very famous Space Wolves Omnibus.
Which wasn't great, to be fair.
I enjoyed it, I will say. I enjoyed it.
It's more from a pretentious lit perspective that it wasn't great. It was actually really entertaining.
Yeah.
Really, really entertaining. And it was, having read all the wikis for the Space Wolves now, he's clearly the expert. The guy who wrote the omnibus is clearly the sort of foundation for the lore of the Space Wolves.
Yeah.
And I've also read, much to my shame now, the Ultramarines omnibus series, which is utterly pathetic, as we'll explain later. But other than that, it's just been, I think with Josh and you, Nath, it's just mainly been reading a monstrous amount of Wikipedia articles, wiki articles. And watching YouTube videos, unless you play the handheld stuff, the miniature, your only real way to experience them is to look up lore, sadly.
Sure.
The occasional game exists, but it's just mainly just the lore. I mean, there are tons of books, obviously, but if you don't read, it's just wiki articles.
Yeah,
it's a shame.
What about you, Josh? How's that sort of? How did it come about for you? Because I think you sort of adopted it the earliest out of all of us, I think, and you did soon the model painting, right?
Yeah, I came in, I think, from the other end from Archie, rather than having that annoying friend that was talking about how amazing 40k was. I was that annoying friend talking about how amazing 40k was. Yeah, I collected the miniatures with another friend when I was a wee lad, and every Christmas you'd get a ridiculously overpriced box of plastic miniatures which you would make and then battle your friend with. But the thing that got me into the universe of 40k wasn't the little miniatures. It was the fact that every army had its own codex book. In 5th edition, you had a codex for every single army. And after a while, I stopped collecting the miniatures and started collecting the codexes instead.
Yeah.
And gathered a collection of all the different codexes for all the different armies, read all the old short stories about them, all the lore behind them, and went, this is much more financially feasible and much better than buying miniatures every single time.
Yeah.
And so threw away the miniatures, sold them to some guy on eBay for a disgusting amount of money, and just started reading 40k books and 40k wiki articles instead, and watching amazing 40k animations like Astartes.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think we should probably elaborate on what Astartes is, as it is, sort of full of frame of reference for this conversation. It is sort of the jumping off point for a wider discussion. But Astartes is effectively a short. I think it's about the entire series, sort of series of shorts or episodes is about 12 minutes long, I think. So
13 minutes exactly.
13 minutes exactly.
Well, approximately.
Well, so basically 12 minutes then.
Yeah.
So it's relatively a short space of time, but what he packs into that, I believe it's produced by a New Zealand animator who's subsequently been hired by Games Workshop officially to work on Warhammer Plus content with the Astartes label.
No, as we haven't mentioned, Games Workshop are the ones responsible for Warhammer Fantasy 40k. They own the brand, they are the IP, they are the company behind them.
Yeah, so they are quite litigious, shall we say, as they've recently released a whole sort of update to their content policy. So I don't know if it'll affect us in any way, but touch wood it doesn't, is that they are quite, any sort of one person sort of using Warhammer IP or ideas, so like iconography or these sort of concepts of a Space Marine and stuff like that, anything remotely sort of resembling the Warhammer 40k universe can be subject to a lot of copyright, as Josh is pointing out, can potentially be seen as misuse of
my head.
Yes. Potentially. We'll have to wait and see if that does rise up as an issue. I should probably know as a law graduate, but I think, yes. The Games Workshop are a British-based company, and so they've been developing Warhammer 40k, Blood Bowl for decades now. I mean...
it's been a while.
I think 40k has been around since the 80s almost, so like the initial sort of seedlings of the world that is the 41st millennia as we know it now. And so I think Astartes is a superbly animated short animation series, and for a community online of people who enjoy Warhammer 40k content like we do, so maybe not enjoying the game as much but more for the investment in the universe itself, there's very little ways, as we've mentioned, to actually engage with it. And so to have high quality content like Astartes that represents the world in such a great way in an engaging
made by one person
affiliated with Games Workshop, to make that clear.
And to have one person create such a fantastic work and really make, it has millions of views, the original, so really reaching a new audience with these presentations. There's a thirst for that, right, in the community, that people want cool representations of Space Marines and the Warhammer 40k universe, but Games Workshop for some reason doesn't leverage that. So stuff like Astartes means even more to a very passionate fan base, and it's pieces like Astartes that get people into the concept of Warhammer as a whole.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me, and I mentioned this to Nathaniel earlier today, is that I feel like while Astartes, this is my personal response to it, I could be completely wrong as I have been in the past. My personal response to Astartes, watching it now for the millionth time, is that it's actually not very beginner friendly. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't tell you what the Space Marines are. It doesn't tell you who they're fighting. It doesn't tell you why they're two human factions against each other. It doesn't explain what that giant golden thing is. It just sort of shows it to you and expects you to know what it is already, which works for fans. But for Aiden, did you not just have a problem?
My final note on this after watching it was, I need to know so much more of what's going on.
Okay.
Like you said,
it made you interested.
Yeah, it hooked me because I think and it depends on if it was intentional or not, but the almost enigma behind a lot of what was going on did kind of draw me in, because I was like, I remember, watching it and talking to being like, okay, I was following it, but then I was like, okay, so different factions. I kind of pinned that, and again, I don't think unless you were paying proper attention, you'd notice that. But I, fortunately, I noticed that. But yeah, then that huge orb thing that sucked the Marine in. I was like, what the hell is going on right now? I was like, this is cool.
I don't think a lot of people are actually aware what that orb is. There's debate about it, but he doesn't specify, and he never really explained what it was. And from what most people can tell, it's just really, really, really old lore. Like, or not old as much as untouched and not really developed on. He deliberately picked something obscure and created debate around it.
Okay, I mean that works, but yeah.
I had no idea what it was. Josh didn't.
Yeah, I was going to say that even for veteran, well, let's say veteran. I'm going to be veteran, but I've been around the franchise for decades, so I'm aware of the warp and all that sort of things and what to expect from the Warhammer 40K world. Now the orb is unusual to say the least, and so I think it's cool how he's almost introducing potentially new sort of corridors for the world to go down through it.
Something which I didn't realize up until now. Up until earlier today, is that the Space Marine chapter he shows, is made up completely. It's not a real chapter.
Yeah, I did know that. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Which is cool as hell. I'm not sure how the TG fans, Josh, would react to that, or react to the idea of Games Workshop now, have hired him. Would if they would, for example, make these new chapters canon? TG would not be pleased about it, but I don't know. I feel like outside perspectives are always. You think they would be pleased?
They 100% would be. TG getting one of their homebrew chapters codified in Games Workshop canon.
Wait, is that a homebrew?
Happy.
Is that a homebrew TG canon?
It's his homebrew chapter. I mean, homebrew chapters are just any chapter that people come up with of their own volition, like Games Workshop doesn't already own. And as far as homebrew chapters go, what was the name of his one?
Redemptor or something? I'm not entirely sure. It was a cool name.
I think it was the Redemptors, I think.
Clearing.
Yeah.
That's, as far as homebrew chapters go, that's a pretty good basis, and they have a pretty good design philosophy. There are some other custom-made chapters with a significantly looser foundation.
That's true.
So I think those ones getting made canon is very good. Okay.
Aiden, for context, the Space Marine faction are split up into various chapters, which were created by the Primarchs. It just kind of what's the word? I've forgotten the word completely. It just skyrockets. It just
spirals. It spirals.
Spirals. You want to explain
the board behind you to explain everything.
Yeah, but Josh, I think you'd probably be best to explain this. I feel like I get lost or muddled. Just explain what the Space Marine chapters are in simple. I feel like you're better at this than I am.
Right. In ye old days of yore, there were a ton of Space Marines. Like, gigantic planet-wide armies of them. Then, an unfortunate thing happened called the Horus Heresy, and most of them ended up dying.
Fulgrim did nothing wrong.
Or moving over to Chaos, which we'll get to.
We don't talk about that.
No, yes, we do.
The ones that were left over, to try and make sure that something called this heresy couldn't ever happen again, to make sure that there wasn't this much military power under the hands of one war master, they were all split under different generals. These generals were the Primarchs. They were like, okay, we're going to split these Primarch collections into further divisions.
Okay.
To try and keep the collections of Space Marines as small as possible, so you couldn't have some giant megalomaniac running around with a bunch of super soldiers. The Redeemers, as far as I'm aware, are just, I don't know which Primarch they're allied to. They wouldn't be allied to one, but they would operate entirely of their own volition under whatever chaplain or chapter master they would have. So you don't really need to know which Primarch they're attached to. They're their own mercenary band, if you will, that are allied to the Imperium.
The Imperium being the main human faction in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The Imperium of
cool.
Man.
Yeah,
very fanatically racist.
Well,
pretty much a parody of ultra far right ideologies now.
It's funny because you mentioned that, Archie, because they recently had to put out that community post.
That's why I was thinking about it. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Warhammer is about love, not hate. Was that what they said?
It's basically some guy at a Spanish tournament would frequently come dressed as a Hitler, basically. and this spoke to a wider issue of various alt-right and white nationalist groups adopting like Warhammer 40K imagery, like for example, God Emperor Trump, which was unironically used by actual Trump supporters. And as you know, it's ironic because the Imperium of Man is a parody of those ideologies. It's an extreme take. It's the logical conclusion to that extremism, and for some reason they decided to adopt what is basically making fun of them as their sort of imagery, which is funny, you know. But anyway, Games Workshop doesn't support that, and obviously doesn't support that. Well, actually, you don't know about the individuals because they're scum, but we'll get to that. But, the company, obviously, in today's day and age, would obviously have to stop to say something against that, and so they did. I really hate Games Workshop, as most supporters of Warhammer, like fans of Warhammer do, because they're capitalist bastards. That's what they are.
Well, I mean, yeah. I think as well. The fact that their share price has gone up like 1,000% over the whole lockdown and everything, and the fact that they've locked community-made content like Astartes behind a paywall now, is effectively, well, professionally known as a dick move. So you know, I think it's hard when you're so invested in a world, because you know, I think, as we've mentioned, that there's the Imperium of Man, but the Warhammer 40K in its entirety is sort of like Gears of War, as we've covered, a grim, dark world. So like it's very apocalyptic, very desolate, and very, very dark. And so it's not just the Imperium of Man that's terrible. There's the Orcs, who are just amazing, the best faction in the game.
Arguable there.
Well, I mean, they're probably enjoying the world the most, to be quite honest. There's a great many memes about orcs, but the Warhammer 40k just community in general makes some fantastic memes. But and then there's the Eldar, who are like a dying sort of elf-like race, effectively, who sort of live on these craft worlds, these enormous sort of traveling cities. There's the Dark Eldar, who are just perverts. Then there's
they're literally perverts.
Yeah, quite literally.
They're literally sexual degenerates.
Then there's the Tau, who are communists. And
for the greater good.
For the greater good. The greater good. I always just think of Hot Fuzz for that. I just think of all these Tau just going the greater good. But and then there's Chaos, right? So there's the whole factions of Chaos, which we'll get into, because you know, I know we've got Total War Warhammer 3 coming out, which I think we're all relatively excited for in our own different ways. But that's part of the more Warhammer world rather than Warhammer 40k, but it's all sort of intertwined in terms of the chaos being the same. So there's
Nurgle is finally going to get the spotlight, which means a lot to me personally.
Yes, I know Archie's a big fan of Papa Nurgle. But effectively the four Chaos Gods are Nurgle, as we said, the Lord of Pestilence.
The oldest of the Chaos Gods.
The oldest of the Chaos Gods. Slaanesh, the youngest of the Chaos Gods, and was created by the Eldar in galactic-wide orgy, effectively, with the psychic feedback of which just destroyed reality, effectively.
Isn't that the reason the warp fell apart, because of the birth of Slaanesh, basically?
Like the psychic feedback of Slaanesh's birth, in consuming all the souls of billions of Eldar, basically like ripped reality in half. So very, very cool, very, very cool entrance to existence if you think about it. But then there's my favourite, Khorne, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull pharaoh. So he's the Chaos God of War. He has the Word Eaters and as his faction of choice in the Chaos Space Marines. But and then there's also Josh's favourite. How do you pronounce it? Tzeentch.
The god of schemes, magic, and lore.
Yeah.
Absolutely pathetic.
Arcane of the four Chaos Gods.
Yes.
Wait, Josh, I have a question.
Thousand Sons is his traitor legion.
Is the
Each god has one legion associated with them.
Then is it Plague Bearers, or is it Lords of Silence for Nurgle?
You get the
Death Guard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mortarian's Death Guard.
I feel like the Lords of Silence are within the Death Guard. I read a book about this recently called The Lords of Silence, but I can't really remember. But I have a question quickly for Nath and Josh. Was Khorne born because of humanity's excessive violence? I swear I read that somewhere.
Not humanity's.
Yeah, because there's a whole galaxy, if you think about it. It's not just humanity.
Yeah, that's what was confusing me. I don't know why I would have read that, because war existed in the galaxy long before humanity did.
However, if you want to get into the deep forbidden lore as to where all the Chaos Gods came from, they didn't actually like they weren't there from the start of the universe. They only popped up, Nurgle included, old as he may be, after the War in Heaven.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because they were an after effect of the old ones utilizing the warp for military means as much as they possibly could, and they royally pissed off the entirety of the Immaterium, which was just the regular emotions of every living being in the galaxy. And the War in Heaven between the old ones and the Necrons, who I don't know which side of me they're on.
they're on your left.
This one?
No, the opposite.
The other one. All right. These guys, the war between the old ones and these guys, basically riled up all of the emotional power of the universe and splintered the somewhat peaceful Immaterium into the four archetypes of having a bad time. Plague, war, excess. Excess didn't come in until the Eldar's orgy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Just I'm not sure what
plan.
it exists as, like maybe just like political machinations, backstabbing, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just going behind your friends, betrayal, maybe lying, all that sort of thing. Fundamental aspects of intelligent life, maybe. Yeah. They're representatives of the worst parts of intelligent life, basically. Well,
Back.
Ted Nurgle, who's just fucking over literally everyone and anything. He's entropy.
He's a
Yeah, he's an absolute king. I mean, everyone.
Yes, God.
For some reason, every Nurgle acolyte and underling loves Nurgle. I mean, he gifts them with his plagues. He's literally called Papa Nurgle.
Yeah, but he's basically just drugging them with diseases. It's not not legitimate.
It's not a good time. It's not a good time at all. But I don't know. Maybe like I'm not going to go as far as to say it's an original idea, but I've never experienced something like that in fantasy before.
Well, I mean,
science fiction.
It is worth noting, I think, with the release of the Dune movie, how much I mean, Frank Herbert wrote Dune in the 1970s, I think. So his ideas would have been pretty popular around the time of the sort of inception of Warhammer 40K. And the whole thing about a god emperor, all the
the equivalent of the Psychers, who are the ones who manipulate the warp agent, called the Spacers Guild in Dune. It's just the Empire is literally called the Imperium. Like I feel like Warhammer, the Imperium of Man and Warhammer has gone far beyond what Dune was, but like if you're going to take it back to the beginning, like we have just now, it does feel like almost ripping off Dune, I'd say.
Well, it's like they took
Sorry.
That's what I mean. It started as that. And
that now Trader was literally just incredibly rich dude who owns a spaceship going around the galaxy. And all the 40k stuff was a backdrop, except and in Rogue Trader they have the people who pilot the ships, the navigators. Called the exact same thing that they are in Dune. They're just navigators, weird psychic warp boys that can fold time and space and do faster than light travel.
Who are addicted to spice, the spice melange.
I don't think they're addicted to anything in 40k. I think they're just.
No.
In 40k they are the same kind of thing though. Is they are part of a specific family and they're all inbred, right? To have the third eye to perceive the Astronomicon.
Are they? I didn't know the
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they are. They're all like
the navigators, not the psychers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you can get general psychers. So as you'll see in Astartes, there are psychers in it. They basically utilize the warp either unconsciously or consciously, whether they're trained or not.
Subconsciously.
Sorry?
You just said either consciously or consciously.
Or subconsciously. I did say sub.
Yeah. I didn't hear the sub.
Oh right. Well, I did say subconsciously.
Okay, fair enough.
So and they as you'll see, is that they're capable of stopping a full-grown Space Marine sprinting at them in midair. They're able to stop bullets, and they have all sorts of different effects that they can do. You know, blast people away, send lightning out of their fingers, and stuff like that. But psychers are also very, very dangerous, is that they can effectively utilize the warp too much, in which they become effectively a living gateway to the warp, which allows demons and such to come through. So the Imperium of Man basically has very, very strict policies against psychers unless they're suitably powerful enough to be trained. They are effectively just hunted down by the Inquisition and eliminated.
What are they called again? The Black Ships?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Loaded onto black ships to serve as sustenance for Biggie.
Well, that is a good point. We should probably explain that with the consequences of the fallout. Well, the fallout of the Horus Heresies. So, effectively, the Emperor of Man is the leader of Man. He's this all-knowing, omnipotent sort of leader of mankind who sort of takes control of planet Earth and then leads humanity to the stars. And so they have a sort of following the sort of collapse of human society in the age of strife, sort of this sort of galactic empire. He sort of creates the Space Marines in effect in order to reconnect these disconnected human worlds, and a great crusade is launched to reunite humanity under the Imperium. And it's during this great crusade that the Horus Heresy occurs and the rise of the Chaos Space Marines happens. Yet
something you didn't mention: the Primarchs are pretty much clones of the Emperor. Like they're made from his gene seed. Well, I was going to say, and consequently, all the Space Marines are then made from the gene seed of the Primarchs.
Yeah. So, like, certain chapters will effectively display certain genetic traits like their Primarch. So, they can also sort of mutate in some ways. So you do end up with some weird ones, like what are they called? The shark chapter,
I don't know them.
The Carcharodons or something. They're quite interesting because they have like the largest Space Marine who ever lived. Is just like this enormous dude in Terminator armor. I can't remember what his name is. It's like Titus or something. But
Ross. That's it. Ross.
Yeah. He's enormous. But yeah, and they basically have like scaled skin and sort of like shark-like features based upon mutation of their gene seed. And so that effectively, the problem with discussing Warhammer is it's impossible to discuss anything without discussing sort of all the background to it. So I'm sure.
Which is what I mentioned. It's impossible.
Yeah.
It spirals, as you said.
Yeah, but I think it's worth still having the conversation, right?
Yeah,
just to.
Anyway, go back to the Emperor as you.
Yeah, and so basically, following the Horus Heresy, there's a siege of terror. Humanity is about to fall, and so the Emperor and one of his chosen sons, Sanguinius, sort of teleport aboard the flagship of Horus, who is another Primarch who turned against, who was the chosen War Master of the Emperor. So he's leading the Great Crusade, and basically he's empowered by the Chaos Gods, Horus, and so he defeats Sanguinius, he kills him, and he defeats the Emperor as well. And so, although he's not dead, the Emperor is effectively interred within the Golden Throne and serves as a beacon, effectively, the Astronomicon. So his psychic power is so vast that he actually stands out as like a lighthouse in the warp. So it allows travel across, across space, and it allows the Imperium to keep existing, effectively. But in order for the Emperor to stay alive in his tomb, effectively, is he has to be fed psychers. I think it's like 1,000 psychers.
1,000 every day.
Every day. So basically, he basically their bodies are just sacrificed to sustain the Astronomicon, effectively. So. And
isn't it most recently in the lore the Astronomicon has fallen?
I believe so, with the Primaris Crusade.
The fall of what's it called, Cadia, and the Astronomicon. I swear, like this was mentioned in the Lords of Silence. The Astronomicon is no longer there, and so the Empire has been split.
Oh, that is because the Eye of Terror had a little Pokemon evolution into whatever it's called now, and it basically cut the galaxy in half. And as far as I'm aware, one side of Eye of Terror Mark II can't see the Astronomicon on the other side.
Okay.
You can still see the Astronomicon if you're on the lucky side of the galaxy. If you're on the unlucky side, then you're going to have a bad time. Yeah. And you can't do any FTL travel.
For some context, Aidan, the Eye of Terror is a big hole into the warp, which exists. I couldn't tell you exactly. All I know is the Fortress World of Cadia looks over it, and there's a specific Space Marine chapter that was created, or multiple chapters created to overlook, to kind of be stationed on Cadia and protect the Eye of Terror, or guard against the Eye of Terror. Keep an eye out. And then something happened. I'm pretty sure it was the
13th
from Chaos.
The 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon.
Abaddon, the spoiler, I think his name was.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which Chaos God he's tied to. I think it might be Chaos Undivided. But anyway, he launched the 13th Black Crusade and brought about the fall of Cadia and the destruction, the evolution of the Eye of Terror.
So what is worth noting, though, is that this is still an evolving world, that we have, decades worth of stories built upon this world, and they've changed, either retconned some stuff or changed some stuff. But currently, where the sort of main storyline is that we are I think we're sort of entering the 42nd millennium, I think. Aren't we getting close to that?
It's towards the very end.
Changed.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I think
it has been stuck at 4,999 for however many years. I think it's time. It might almost be titled Berserk for longest running standstill without moving the plot forward.
Yeah.
I think Berserk was like 13 years, and I don't know how long 40K has been.
But if you think about it, right, with Berserk, literally nothing happens in the story, but in the lore, so many things happen in that 1 year. You know, so many splintering stories happen within that 1 year. Like,
That is true.
so much. Like, because it's encompassing an entire galaxy of various factions within various races. It's such a ridiculous amount of stuff happened in that 1 year, not including all the history of all that. You know, like
Yeah.
it's a ridiculously detailed world created by lots of people. Like, it's not just one person. It's not like a Tolkien lore master who's been sitting in a dark room for 50 years. It's multiple people over every year, and new books come out. Josh and I recently read a book called The Infinite and Divine, which is a recently published book about the Necrons and the Necron tier. It's really
Best
good.
race.
Yeah, it's clean. I like the Necrons a lot, although I don't think they're the best race. Then again, yeah, no, that's the race.
Everyone's allowed to have an incorrect opinion once in a while.
Speaking of incorrect opinions, how about we go around and say our favorite part of the universe, be it race, location, event.
Well, you start then, Archie. You start, seeing as you're asking the
Yeah,
question.
well, I mean, my opinion is always going to be chaos, but specifically Nurgle. Fucking love Nurgle. The amount of times I've read the Nurgle wiki article from various sites, 1D4chan, the lexicon. What's it called again? Was there like a kind of wiki? Yeah, the lexicon, and then of course there's just Warhammer 40K.wiki.com. And I just love Nurgle. I love his aesthetic. I love the idea of him. I don't know. I like the idea of entropy. I like gods who are based on entropy. It's in other fantasy universes as well. I like this unique idea that however much he curses everyone seems to love him. You know, that's whole idea of Papa Nurgle. I like his various, the idea of his demons, like the great unclean ones who are just copies of him.
Mm-hmm.
Like monstrous copies of him who can actually exist outside of the Immaterium, the warp, because Nurgle cannot leave the warp. I'm not entirely sure why. Can any of the Chaos Gods leave the warp, Josh?
I have no idea. I don't think so.
I swear recently, because they are creatures, inherently pure creatures of the warp. So they are born of the warp, so I don't think they can leave it. Because they are literally the fragment of the warp. As Josh said, when the warp fragmented, they were created. So it'd be like us trying to enter another, whatever. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not.
The dimension. The closest
Yeah.
they can get is sending their greater demons over here to terrorize people.
Yeah, the great unclean ones are the case of Nurgle. I don't know. I really like this idea of like each Chaos God has its own realm. Be it Khorne's. What are they called again? What are Khorne's lands called?
I don't actually know. Because
Oh,
I know because there's the Garden of Nurgle. There's the
which is what I was going to bring up. I love that stuff.
Yeah, and then I'm swear Saints has like a maze, right?
Yeah, like an infinite maze.
Labyrinth.
Yeah, the labyrinth.
What labyrinth?
Crystal Labyrinth, I think it's called.
Yeah. And I mean, I really like the idea of this like blooming, disgusting garden that goes on forever and exists everywhere. You know, behind the scenes of the universe exists this monstrous, disgusting garden full of horrifying things. I just like that idea, that image. And then Nurgle looming tall over everything with his giant cauldron, creating disease after disease after disease. And I mean, I read somewhere, and maybe it was just a wiki article, that Nurgle, in a sense, is almost pure in his existence. He doesn't necessarily represent malice, because he almost represents rebirth, because with the death of things comes eventual life. When bodies rot, they fertilize the land, and from that fertilized land, things grow. Nurgle stands for that. You know, while Khorne is just violence and death and horror, there's something to be said about Nurgle in regards to his ties to the inherent natural flow of life in the universe.
Yeah, that's
He's like good and bad almost.
He's more passively neutral, I suppose, and that he represents a sort of
yeah.
fundamental aspect of existence, right? That things degrade, things decay. But I also think Khorne does as well, especially in the Warhammer 40K universe, is that war is ubiquitous, right? Like you can't escape it. War is a part of life, and so it's not so much just war; it's also the struggle of life and death, right? That prey and predator, right? But I mean, Josh, what would you say was your favorite? I mean, you've made it clear that you have a bias towards the Necron tier, but
to be clear, by the way, if we're going to choose a favorite race, my favorite race is the Necron tier. I just really like Nurgle's part of Chaos the most, and I really wouldn't really call Chaos a race personally.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Josh. I'm very proud.
Yeah.
However, It has nothing to do with Necrons.
Oh.
My favorite part. It is all the spicy ironies that you get in the 40k universe. Whether it's from the Emperor when he tried unifying Terra and he outlawed religion because he viewed it as a tool that those in power used to subjugate the weak.
Yeah.
Fast forward 10,000 years and this desiccated husk is being worshipped by an entire galaxy-spanning Imperium, which he would hate the idea of.
Yeah.
He
was enlightened and modern, and then they used that enlightened modernity as a tool of oppression, which is what he hated.
Yeah,
it's a great
became the very thing he hated. And then Magnus the Red, one of the Primarchs, who is now elected Siege, was originally, even during the Horus Heresy, one of the Emperor's supporters. And he was advocating for, the rights of Psykers to not be oppressed in the Imperium, and wanted to show the Emperor how useful they could be, being a Psyker himself. And in doing so, he tried to use his Psyker powers to rush back to the Emperor.
Oh, God.
As was happening. And in doing so, broke what the Emperor was working on. He was tricked by Siege, sure, but he broke what was meant to be a replacement to what was at the time called the Pharos Beacon, which was the old Astronomicon, and effectively doomed all Psykers in the Imperium to an eternity of being oppressed and subjugated by the Empire, because everybody views Magnus now as one of the arch traitors behind the heresy, despite trying his best to stop it from happening. It's hilarious.
I heard somewhere that recent stories from the perspective of Magnus are actually he comes off as a likable character. He doesn't come off as even in his chaos version, he's actually like a decent person still somehow.
He currently in the 41st millennium, with the fall of Cadia, brought his planet Sortarius, the planet of the sorcerers, into the Materium, and is finally realizing his dream of a world where Psykers aren't, prejudiced against, and it's being hailed as a beacon of knowledge and the arcane, and isn't really affiliated with any of the Chaos Gods. It's also not affiliated with the Empire, so the Empire obviously hates it. But it's not evil, it's just a bunch of nerds sitting in their wizard planet and doing magic.
Something to be said about the Horus Heresy is that there were quite a few Space Marine legions who didn't ally themselves either with Chaos or the Imperium. They just split off. They're called. I think they're still part of the Traitor Legions, but they're not actually allied with Chaos. They're just their own thing. I don't think they're that big, and I don't think from the books I've read, they don't ever show up as chapters. They're more individual Space Marines who act as like lonely bounty hunters and stuff.
Oh.
Well, I mean, there's the whole sort of Alpha Legion, isn't there? The way the Alpha Legion is sort of effectively seen as almost a double agent within Chaos, potentially, right?
I don't know that.
Well, because Alferis and Omegon is that they think it's only one of the twins that actually sort of converted to Chaos. Well, they converted to Chaos. Is that they sort of just sided with Horus rather than effectively, committing to Chaos, right? And they've suffered extremely, extremely low casualty rates. So they sort of think it's like potentially that there is rumor that within the sort of speculation of the community that they are sort of this linchpin almost as a sort of double agent faction.
Something
Switzerland of the 41st millennium. They took no sides.
Yeah. Something which I've noticed in our conversation so far is we've been very, very focused on the Imperium, on Space Marines. I think there's something to be said about the wider stuff, like Tau, like Eldar, like Necrons.
That's what I was going to say, because my favourite faction is the Eldar. So they were the first codex I got, and I always like elf races and whatever. Like I love the Tistandi and the Malazan. I love the Elezen in Final Fantasy. I love the elves in Lord of the Rings. I always really like elf races, like long-lived, wise, and just all that sort of shit. It's really cool to me. So the Eldar are like the epitome of that. I mean, I do like also, as you mentioned, Archie, sort of more philosophically, I do like the idea of a race becoming so advanced they just get bored and fuck the galaxy into oblivion.
Josh mentioned the orgy, actually.
Yeah, I mean, so effectively, the Eldar were a creation of the Old Ones who went to war with the Necron tier, but they effectively were and are genetically engineered to be extremely psychically in tune. So they had a very, very strong connection with the warp and the Immaterium. And so basically each sort of everything that an Eldar would experience, that a human would experience, they'd experience it tenfold because of this sort of psychic effect that they would experience with everything. And so, as they effectively inherited the galaxy, as following the war in heaven, there wasn't really any other factions to speak of, and the Eldar were highly advanced. They spread out across most of the majority of the galaxy, and they had very, very strong psychic magic, very, very high level technology, and so they just got bored. And so the birth of the Dark Eldar occurred in this very, very luxurious sort of peak of a civilization, and they decadence effectively,
extreme decadence.
The boredom that people had with not having any problems. There's no war, there's no famine, there's no nothing. And coupled with their psychic connection to the warp, is that effectively the fall of the Eldar occurred, in which there's so many Eldar were putting so much pressure on the warp with so many decadent pursuits, and as they got more and more in search of greater sensation, they effectively went to the birth of Dark Eldar. They went to more perverted things, and so effectively imagine like an entire civilization of just BDSM enthusiasts, and so it basically made such an impact on reality that the weight of it led to the birth of Slaanesh, the fourth and final Chaos God. Well, final Chaos God.
There's debate about that now as well.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, it led to the birth of the Eye of Terror, where reality was literally fractured in half, as Slaanesh harvest the souls of trillions of Eldar in one instant. So the Eldar are basically just this fallen race. They only live on craft worlds, and they effectively have to keep shielding their souls from Slaanesh, who's eager to consume them.
Don't forget to mention the webway, by the way.
Oh, well, as you mentioned about Magnus the Red, that's what he fucked up, is the Emperor was effectively trying to connect or build his own network of the webway, which is a thing that particularly the Dark Eldar use, and the Eldar as well, is an alternative to faster than light travel than going through the warp, as sort of the Imperium dub. So if you think of the Imperium as sort of brute forcing your way through reality, the webway is more of a sort of set highway. It's following the roads rather than driving a monster truck across a field. So it's far more delicate and refined, and it's far more safe. You're not exposed to the dangers of demons and such. Well, it was until Magnus Red fucked it all up and opened the webway to the warp right in the Palace of Terror. But
it's still sort of safe.
Oh, is it?
He fucked up the Emperor's what do you call it? Bypass for the webway. The webway itself is still mostly untouched by the warp.
Oh, I thought the
Dark Eldar that lives in there. Like
I thought the Dark Eldar. Oh, okay.
But their city is like built in the webway. So I'm not even sure if the webway is. I think it's another dimension, I guess. And their city is in this other dimension.
Doesn't it exist within the warp? Basically,
the webway.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's a separate thing.
It's
a set of highways that go through the warp, maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
We should also, by the way, we mentioned it a couple of times and not explained it. We should mention the War in Heaven, because that's like from the name, it's like the sort of the creation myth of Warhammer. Like every fantasy universe has a creation myth, and it basically goes that actually. I think I'm going to try. Josh, please supplement. But it started off with the old ones, who were the creators of the universe, and they were just like the ultra original advanced species who laid the seeds for everything that exists. So how like in every fantasy and space opera universe, there's always that old technology. They were that old technology, and they had a war with the Necrontyr, who were the Necrons before they became monstrous machines, and that led to the creation of the Eldar. I think isn't that why the Eldar were created, or they were servants to the old ones, weren't they?
Yeah, they were sort of production line made. I don't know if you know this now, why the Eldar popped up, but the old ones were losing the war in heaven, and in their death throes, they were just hastily cobbling together whatever races they could. So they made the orcs, or the Krorks as they called them.
Yeah.
They made the Eldar. They made
some
other
dwarves
ones that I don't really care about. Don't mention the squats; they don't exist. They were officially retconned, and they aren't in 40K anymore.
That's a shame.
Dwarves have no place in space. So
I know
the orcs were made because the old ones were losing the war, and they were like, shit.
I think the most fundamental event in the War in Heaven, which has affected the current stuff, is that the Necrons made a deal with what were known as the Catan, which were the Star Gods. I think they came even before the Old Ones. They were like the equivalent of the Lovecraftian gods of the Warhammer universe, giant Star Eaters, which would just consume entire stars and all that. And they made a deal with the Necrontyr made a deal with the Catan, and in the process, they made themselves immortal, but put themselves into like mechanical bodies, which made them slaves to the Catan. And the Catan, the Necrons eventually rose up against the Catan, and trapped them split them into Catan shards. I think they're called, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the shards show up in various forms all over the place. I think one of the Ultramarines omnibus involves a star shard of some god. I think there's talk that the machine god might itself be a star god.
Oh yeah. Was it the Void Dragon on Mars or something, right?
Or something like that. Yeah. I'm not entirely familiar, but anyway, then the Necrons shut themselves away to await the sort of the rebirth of civilization in the universe, I think. And now, right now in the universe's lore, the Necrons are now waking up from their 10,000-year-old sleep.
You missed an important detail, though.
Oh no, what did I miss?
Because that was the 5th edition Necron lore, which was the old Necron lore.
Oh shit.
And they didn't. What you described there was basically all the Necrons had in terms of backstory. The Eldar have fucking a god into existence. The Imperium has the entire 40k timeline as history. The Necrons just had that. They were like a Saturday morning cartoon for the old ones to fight against. And they won, and they didn't have anything to show for it. But when, I can't remember what edition it was, it might have been 7? I don't know. Games Workshop basically retconned the fact that the Catan enslaved the Necrons by making the Necrons pull out an Uno reverse card on the Catan after biotransference happened. They were ascended into their metal bodies, beat the old ones, and then while the Catan were feasting on all the souls of the old ones, the Necrons somehow, through some, I don't know, magical plot device, broke free of their rule, and while they were all gorging themselves on the old ones, the Catan, the Necrons shattered them into all the shards, and imprisoned these shards.
Which, I mean, is pretty good lore, even if it's
excellent lore.
It's really, really good lore.
It's another spicy bit of irony that the king that ordered the biotransference in the first place, because he didn't want to see his people as slaves to the old ones, saw them become slaves to the Catan instead. Felt really bad about it and just decided to go away and left the galaxy. Bumps into the Tyranids like 100,000 years later and came sprinting back saying, "Oh crap, we got a bit of a problem."
Aiden, for context, the Tyranids are basically the xenomorphs of the, the Zerg, if you know your StarCraft. They're just like a hive mind species of unstoppable, killable, but they just keep respawning. If a Tyranid fleet arrives in your galaxy, you're done. You're done. You probably just leave. You have no option. They just eat everything. They amalgamate everything into themselves. Like in the same way that the xenomorphs could create different forms of themselves from different creatures. Like, I don't know if you've seen Alien 3, but there's a xenomorph dog in it, for example. And then, of course, there's in Alien vs. Predator, there's the xenomorph predator. In that same sort of way, the Tyranids create, kind of Tyranid forms of whatever race they're fucking over in their process of amalgamation. And they're scary as hell. They're completely blind. They're like a force of nature. They're just violent and horrible and twisted, but they're completely natural. And nothing
like the Flood and Halo.
They're inevitable. They just cannot be stopped.
No, that sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. I really like the Tyranids. My favorite Warhammer book is actually, much to my shame, an Ultramarines book about the fight against the Tyranids. I'm not entirely sure where. We should probably explain the hatred of the Ultramarines. Of all the Space Marine chapters, the Ultramarines are the most basic. They're so basic. They follow the Codex Astartes. Cringe. And,
I like the Ultramarines. I think the Ultramarines hate is so lame, man. People have been saying it for like decades.
Dude, Codex Astartes, grim. Like, the Codex Astartes is why the main character in that book series is banished to the Eye of Terror. Because he and a friend of his go inside one of the hive ships and bring it down from the inside, and automatically the higher ups in the Ultramarines chapter are like, they're tainted by chaos. Get them out of here. Just because they did the impossible, basically, and went against the Codex Astartes and saved that galaxy. I felt that shit. I know.
One of these books says this bad.
Yeah, exactly. Like no.
Well,
To be clear though, you should, if you want like like a wide encompassing look on the Warhammer 40K universe, you should actually read Dan Abnett's Warhammer Ultramarines Omnibus, because like it deals with the Eldar, the Dark Eldar, the Tau, the Tyranids, and Chaos all together. It's like a really, really like that was how I first experienced Warhammer properly. Those books. So it's a really good entry point. It's well written. It's entertaining as hell. And there are quite a few of them. So it's
Okay.
yeah. I don't know if I have them anymore, but they're worth reading. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Abnett's pretty much led the charge in terms of revamping the lore and stuff like that, hasn't he? He's quite
he's
well
on the
regarded.
level. Yeah. Unfortunately, he's the guy responsible for the Ultramarines, but whatever.
I thought I always see that the was it Matt Watson or whatever was
Oh wait, sorry.
Don't mention his name.
well.
No, sorry.
Matt Ward.
I was wrong. This guy Matt is the one who wrote the Ultramarine series. Dan Abnett did a whole bunch of other stuff, including the Imperium. Oh, and yeah, he's the guy responsible for the Imperium lore, isn't he, Josh? Imperium of Man, Dan Abnett.
Dan Abnett.
Yeah, like he wrote
for the Imperium lore.
He wrote Eisenhorn. He wrote that other thing which I got. What was it? The one that you suggested that TG liked. The one about what was his name?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. The not the Inquisitor, the Commissar. Go on.
The God's Ghost. He wrote those, which is just endless, and they're like a really good look into the Imperium of Man, the army of the Imperium of Man, not the Space Marines, but the actual rank and file, who are pretty much just normal humans. And like again, that's why I think Josh, you really like that, because it's a look into how real humans exist in a world like that, surrounded by Space Marines who are basically gods. The things they fight are literally horrifying. I mean, the only way the Imperium of Iran really works as an army is just by throwing corpses at things and hoping that eventually they win.
Bodies.
Yeah,
they also have the best character in the entire 40k universe in the form of Alanius Pius.
Who's he again?
So when you were talking, Nath, about the Siege of Terra and Sanguinius and the Emperor jumping onto Horus's ship and facing him down, after Sanguinius was cut down by Horus, there was as Horus was walking to deal the final blow, a lone guardsman called Alanius Pius jumped up in front of him with his little flashlight, his little las gun, and basically held him back while I think the Emperor was wounded and recovering as well, and almost single-handedly, by distracting Horus enough with the sheer size of his balls, managed to buy time for the Emperor to regain his footing. I mean, he was killed horribly, but imagine standing up in the face of a literal demigod with basically a toothbrush that you know is not going to kill him, just because of the strength of your faith.
Aiden, you have to understand that the Space Marines are crazy. Like, every human who sees a Space Marine is just like, holy fuck. Their minds are blown all the time. And then we have Primarchs who are just literally demigods. Like, they're just, like crazy power. Which is what makes Warhammer so cool, I think. This crazy concentration of immense power among so many characters. Like, a lot of fantasy has characters like Gandalf and stuff who are really powerful, but most people are just normal. But then Warhammer is so all-encompassing that literally everything is just ridiculous. And it's what makes it really entertaining, in my opinion.
Okay, I can see that. I mean, you kind of get a glimpse of that, obviously, when I was watching the video, like, the, bit where one of the Marines gets sucked in and his arm, is obviously chopped off, and there's not even a recognition that his arms just fell off. He's just kind of carrying on with things as like, and that was kind of, again, then I was like, okay, so these guys are hardcore. I'm about that.
They're really, really hardcore. And by the way, if you were wondering, those things in his head, those little metal pins, they represent a century of life or service. Did you not know that?
I had no idea. I thought they were bullets.
No. They represent a century in service to the Emperor.
Oh right, I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, that's mentioned in a book somewhere. I'm not entirely sure which one. It's probably the Ultramarines one, I'm afraid.
Oh right, that's cool.
I think. Yeah. There you go. A bit of new lore for you guys. It's a small thing, but it's there.
But that's the whole thing about 40k. There's so many small things that add to this whole big picture. Like our conversation, right? We could talk for literally hours on this. I mean, we've almost done an hour, but I think
it's worth it.
It's just because as we're the Nerd Impact podcast, this is a series that I've not a series, but a universe is the only way of saying it correctly, or accurately, is been a part of my life for decades. And like I remember when I was back in Australia using my school issued iPad to just sit off the edge of my bed, reading the Warhammer wiki for hours on end after school. And it's just like
same thing, but not on an iPad, not on a laptop. Just sit in the corner of the dining room on the laptop.
Yeah.
One screen was RuneScape, and the other was Warhammer Universe lore. Just be grinding out wood cutting while reading lore is great.
I mean, like you can still get. I mean, there's particularly fantastic channels that will discuss Warhammer lore. Like on YouTube, there's Major Kill if you're autistic and like Australian people, and then there's also Luton for more well-adjusted people who I listen to a lot when I go to bed at night as to sort of fall asleep to. He does fantastic, really well constructed videos about. In sort of more wider reaching, sort of more general aspects of the Warhammer lore, and also quite specific aspects, which he does fantastically. But yeah, I mean, consuming Warhammer content, there's so many ways of doing it, but there's probably fewer now than before almost, because we haven't had a good Warhammer game since Warhammer Space Marine. And Space Marine.
Battlefleet Gothic Armada.
Well, true. Yeah, sorry. No.
Well, maybe rephrase it.
Superior.
There's limited selection, I'd say.
Yeah, the main characters are Space Marines, they're Ultramarines. That's the point. But Mark Strong does voice one of those Space Marines, which is a saving grace, in my opinion.
He voices the main character, Captain Titus.
Yeah. That's like that game is great. Like, it has this like it's easily consumed. You don't really need to know too much. It takes place on a Forge world, which is a sick location. Like, you don't. Aiden, we should probably explain that as well. Another faction within the Imperium One who technically exist separate, but are in kind of like a deal basically with the Imperium, are the I've forgotten their name. The Adeptus Mechanicus, who are responsible for the technology of the Imperium. They're an amazing army. And they have these worlds called Forge worlds, which are where the great armies of the Imperium, their tanks, their Titans, all these things are created. And the game takes place on a besieged Forge world where orcs have invaded. And it's just you can probably get it on your Xbox if you want to play it. It plays a lot of Gears of War. It's that kind of game. Gun fights and chainswords. Yeah, iconic those things. I wouldn't be surprised if. Huh? What?
Like the old God of War games.
Yeah.
Also like Gears of War, I think. And then it's just a lot of running around and hacking and slashing.
I feel like
the hack and slash combat in Gears of War is there.
There isn't hack and slash combat.
Chainsword stuff. The
same kind of like visceral violence, sure.
Yeah. I was more thinking about the fact that I was comparing it to Gears because a lot of Space Marine can just be played with a gun.
That's true.
Yeah, like sure you can go full melee and it's very entertaining squashing orcs. Like the gibbing is just amazing.
Why would you ever not use the Thunderhammer? Like Thunderhammer plus plasma pistol is all you need.
I don't use the Thunderhammer, bro. Chainsaw all the way.
I mean the chainsaw is incredible. You can't beat it.
Chainsaw's amazing. It's so good. But just in general, like that is the peak of like the classic cinematic AAA game. That is the best we've seen so far. Like obviously, as Josh mentioned, there have been a lot of other Warhammer games. I mean, the Dawn of War series, which are the best strategy Warhammer 40K games that exist. There's Battlefleet Gothic Armada, the two of them. Then, of course, there's the upcoming Dark Tide, which is
Space Hulk Deathwing as well.
Oh, Space Hulk Deathwing, which.
Well, I mean, that's maybe a middling experience, and not necessarily very expansive on the lore. Really invest you in the world, but
they nail the aesthetic though.
Yeah. So that's more of a niche thing, but
But Dark Tide, I think, is the one on the horizon, which everyone's looking forward to. Going to be so cool. Set on, not sure what the name of the world is, but it's a hive world. Hive world's in where the human population lives. They're monstrous cities, which are like as tall as the sky and house billions. And between the various hive cities that make up a hive world is just a wasteland of nothing. It's disgusting. It's horrible. It's just
What's the other game that just came out?
Oh, Necromunda.
Necromunda.
That's Discount Doom Eternal. That's
Doom Eternal Warhammer flavor.
Yeah.
And it has incredible environments.
Yeah, once again, it's by the guys who made Deathwing, and the environments. They know their Warhammer. Like they're not quite that good at designing games, but their Warhammer knowledge is incredible. And they're clearly passionate about Warhammer more than most, I'd say.
Because it does seem to be does seem to be the case with the games. You do have to sort of almost sacrifice consistency with the lore to gameplay quality, right? Is that like the more painfully adherent they are to pre-existing lore to to actually expanding things with the gameplay, it's kind of like a toss-up between the two, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Games Workshop is a pretty massive assholes when it comes to letting people do things. I'm actually surprised that they let Creative Assembly. They gave them so much freedom with that, like creating, for example, what's that army they've created for the new one?
Cafe.
Yeah, I mean,
They still made the models for them. They didn't let Creative Assembly come up with the models. They came up with the models. They let Creative Assembly then put them into their game.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I don't know. I just feel like Creative Assembly have lucked out with the sort of approach that Games Workshop have given them, because Games Workshop, as we mentioned with this whole fan-made content, there's this huge fan-made scene on YouTube and other websites, and then as soon as Games Workshop notices they're popular, they buy out all the fan-created stuff and then ban anyone from making any more, and then lock all the current stuff behind a paywall.
Yeah.
Instead of just making their own and letting others do their own thing, no, they have to own it all. And they're not even doing that much. Warhammer Plus is nothing on it. Nothing. It's crazy to me how this IP, which is literally perfection when it comes to space fantasy, is so underutilized. I mean, Games Workshop has the potential for TV shows, games. Well, they've obviously got books already, but TV shows, games, films. Maybe it's hard to market something that is so extremely violent, but the world has moved towards the M-rated more and more and more over time with Deadpool and Wolverine. The idea of M-rated superhero stuff is okay and is more popular, and the sort of morally grey dark stuff is more and more open to it. And thanks to Game of Thrones, the executives are aware that fantasy is popular. So, it doesn't make sense to me that it's so underutilized.
And I think as well, with such a vast world, as you can, if you're listening to this, you can probably gather that we've gone on so many different tangents, is that you could easily make a TV show with the core concepts, but expand upon that and really build your own niche in this world, because it's so sort of rock solid in some ways, but also sort of flexible as a whole, I guess, is that you could change a lot of things about it within a TV show without affecting the overall sort of integrity of it, right? So you could have niche storylines set within the story, set within the universe, without affecting the wider plot line and stuff. So
the lore masters won't get pissed off, basically.
Exactly. So you're basically protected from sort of fan base backlash by having that sort of space to operate in. So you are right, Archie. It's almost embarrassing how much they have the lengths they go to protect their IP without utilizing the IP to the extent at which they could. Is almost backwards, right?
It is completely backwards. It doesn't make any sense. I realise, by the way, that we haven't mentioned Warhammer Fantasy at all.
Well, you did sort of diverge straight into talking about Warhammer 3 and that without, sort of predicating the fact that is Warhammer Fantasy, which is in fact a very similar, well, in some regards similar, in that it has similar factions, but it is a entirely different world, effectively.
Once upon a time, they used to be connected, but then they retconned that, which is disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah.
And about the same time they deleted Fantasy because it wasn't making Games Workshop enough money. Yeah. And it wasn't as easily copyrightable as everything in 40K, as you were saying now. They're very, very territorial with their IP. And everything in Fantasy was, elves and dwarves. And you can't copyright the name elf, but you can copyright the name Duardin. So they instead deleted Fantasy and made Age of Sigmar instead, which is much more easy to enforce copyright law over.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why they aren't making TV shows and movies, because they're so protective and they have to give that creative freedom to a director, to writers?
They have the money to create their own studios. They're ridiculously rich. They are, a billionaire company. They could do that. They could just create their own studios and then have control of what's being made. They wouldn't have to hire out outside help.
But then again, that can also backfire. Look at studio interferences with Warner Brothers and stuff. Films are absolute dog shit. So
yeah, that's fair.
I can see.
Maybe in the future we'll see some new CEO, some new enlightened CEO who's let's market this to a wider audience.
I think you're right.
That will happen. But right now, the old guard of the the sort of board for Games Workshop are just assholes.
I mean, from what I've heard this episode, like, I would love something, especially, you know, if they wanted to gain new audiences, that'd be the most accessible way, is getting a TV show or a movie, you know. Start from a somewhat good jumping off point and work from there. You know,
just do something like the Imperium of Man, because the Imperium of Man is so small and so easily recognizable. And the idea of the Imperium of Man interacting with alien races, the audience would empathize more with the Imperium of Man, because the Imperium of Man of the rank and file experiencing something totally alien to them. That's the easy idea to adapt. I mean, sure, the CGI would be insane, but in regards to writing a story surrounding that whole idea, it would be a lot easier to get the audience to emotionally empathize with that. You know, it's easy, I'd say, on a storycraft level.
So, coming back to someone like
What,
myself... Sorry, Josh, go on.
Wasn't very good.
What did they do?
One of the few things that is on Warhammer Plus is Hammer and Bolter.
Oh, I had not seen that.
Watching the Imperium fighting some orcs, and it's an animated show. But if you compare that with another animated show from a studio that's recently gone into the animated show scene, like Arcane from League of Legends, is amazing.
Yeah.
It was Workshop's attempts to go into animated stuff after blitzing all the creators making free content for them was pathetic.
See, that's what I don't understand, right? Like, the free content that they were creating was driving up sales and interest in the Warhammer universe for free. Free advertising. Like, people would see Astartes and be like, Warhammer 40K, and they would open this huge, like floodgates of books, of models, of lore books, of whatever, like video games, for free. They would draw attention to them for free, and no, let's get rid of that, let's lock it behind a paywall.
That goes on nicely to what I was going to ask. So for someone like me, who's, you know, only just watched Astartes, or you know, wanted to get into it more, and maybe for listeners, what would be I suppose there's too many, but what would be some of the best starting points for someone to get into it and then go off on their own path?
I'm afraid reading books.
I mean, that's fine for someone like me, but yeah.
Yeah, like, wait, what would you say, Josh?
Reading shitpost articles on 1D4chan is the best.
1D4chan Hayden is a like a sort of like a parody wiki, which is like made up of created by these like degenerate old school Warhammer fans who react badly to literally anything that's released that goes against what they think Warhammer should be. It's very entertaining read. Like they know their stuff.
Accurate.
Yeah, accurate, but also funny.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that as well.
You do understand lore from it, but it's also hilarious. And you also have wiki articles on the various homebrew made-up chapters, like the Angry Marines, who are just TG, tabletop gaming fans, manifested in a Space Marine chapter. So the joke is they're always really, really angry. Their slogan is always angry all the time. There are a lot of funny little anecdote written things of Imperial people interacting with the Angry Marines. They just appear out of nowhere, smack everyone, kill everyone, and leave. It's great. I love it. And then, of course, there's the Pretty Marines, who are disgusting. They're like boy Space Marines. It's funny. You know, it's just its own thing. But, you know,
it already exists as the Emperor's Children in Canada.
Yeah. But, I mean, basically what we're trying to say with this is that all this exists because of a very passionate fan base.
Yeah.
You know, like, people can dive into these things via wiki or book or whatever and experience so much. I know we mentioned earlier that it's becoming harder and harder to actually get any of this without paying huge amounts of money. But, like, it depends on what you want. Like, if you don't want to read a book or whatever, then it's harder. But, like, if you're okay with reading, there's a huge amount. There is a huge amount. You know, like, wiki articles, books, anything you want, really.
Right.
Well worth it. But anyway, back to Warhammer Fantasy, which is Josh's territory. Or was it Nath's?
Well, I mean, you basically just mentioning about Total War Warhammer 3, so, you know, I suppose Total War is effectively a long-running series of RTS-style games, so, you know, you must have played Total War Rome, do you remember that? Yeah. So you control, like, units of soldiers, and effectively Total War 3 is the third of the trilogy of games set within the Warhammer Fantasy universe. So again, very similar to 40k, but as Archie mentioned, is that they've actually added in, well, they've created for the game, the newest release, they purposely created new factions. So, like, I think the Ogre Kingdoms existed in the actual tabletop, but Cathay is a whole new sort of faction that didn't have a codex, wasn't developed. So, yeah, it's just like if you enjoy Warhammer 40k for its scale, then but you maybe perhaps want something a bit more medieval almost, then Warhammer 40 fantasy, or as it is in the old world as it's effectively known, is quite good and has some fantastic characters in it. Tyrion being one of them.
It's very much as developed and detailed as 40k, but constrained within one planet instead of the universe.
So the scale isn't as incomprehensible, and it's perhaps a bit more constrained. Yet it's also quite apocalyptic and still grim dark, but maybe not to the same excessive extent. Far more fantasy effect than sort of just ridiculousness that Warhammer 40k gets to, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it does have some connections to 40k. Like, for example, the Chaos Gods are the same.
Yeah,
including the new one. What's the new one called? The Great Horned Rat or something?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't he a
Skaven.
Chaos God? It was.
In Age of Sigmar, yes. Age of Sigmar, 40k.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
Diverged.
Yeah,
well,
true.
I think it's worth explaining the end times, right? Because effectively how, as Josh mentioned, and you probably know more about the end times than I do, Josh, but effectively Games Workshop, as you said, couldn't defend the generic fantasy tropes of their characters from within their IP, so they effectively used the lore, or they had to create a reason in the lore as to how the world gets changed so they can protect their IP. So a very business-driven lore revamp, but basically the end times is the end of the world of Warhammer. Effectively, Archaon the Ever-Chosen becomes the chosen of all four Chaos Gods and leads a united Chaos army, including the Skaven, against the forces of order, and they effectively destroy the entire planet, effectively, is my understanding of it. I don't know if...
All the while, the forces of order are tripping each other up because the plot had to be furthered somehow. So... It
wasn't particularly clean, I would say, that there was a lot of lore misunderstanding or direct ignoring of sort of the importance of certain characters and their abilities, which sort of... They had to create reasons as to how such an event could occur, right?
Yeah, and they also had to create reasons why some big players in the fantasy world were suspiciously missing, sort of forgot to save the date for the end times. Didn't throw in during the final fights. Overall, yeah, I'd say the end times, despite the fact that it gets some TG neckbeards very angry. Overall, they're good. The end time stories, there are tons of books. Fantasy compared to 40k never really had as much content made for it as 40k because it was always the less popular one.
Yeah.
End times changed that because while it's a joke that in 40k the plot never moves forward, despite the fact that it just recently has, the plot never moves in fantasy, and it had stayed there for like 2 decades, and then they just went, okay, end times, world's over, here's a new Age of Sigmar thing, but all of the end time stories were really interesting, and a lot of the factions got some good development in them. Granted, they were then immediately thrown in the bin and replaced by the replacement faction in Age of Sigmar. But Creative Assembly gets to keep Warhammer Fantasy for making the tabletop. Sorry, not the tabletop. Total War Warhammer Fantasy.
The one thing
surviving.
Nath and Josh are a lot more into fantasy because of Total War Warhammer, which I'm not a big fan of. I don't like strategy games very much. But there's one thing about Warhammer Fantasy which I think beats out everything, which is the Skaven. I love the Skaven. The Skaven are rat men who were created. I don't remember the lore exactly, but the story goes that this weird hooded man appeared in some city, and there's something about a bell. Josh, do you know the story?
I remember the story.
Yeah, it's really,
me.
Yeah, like read the wiki article on the creation of the Skaven because it's a very good little short story in and of itself, and it's really mystical and weird and scary and suggestive. It's like good ambiguous horror. And
pretty good.
And they have this giant. They have it's not called the Undercity, is it? The Under Network or something? The thing underground that connects everything.
The Undercity, the Undercity.
It's the Undercity. Yeah, it's like the Undercity, which is this endless network of rat warrens that spread throughout most of the known world. And they've got various cool factions that interact with each other, like Clan Pestilence, which is great. Even though for some reason Clan Pestilence has nothing to do with Nurgle, apparently. But I could be wrong there. Am I wrong?
They're associates.
They are associates. Okay, cool. And then they have
worshipping Nurgle.
Yeah, well, I mean, they must have something to do with Nurgle because of the Pestilence, right? But
Yeah.
then they have the Vermintide, which is when they arise. Like the networks of the Undercity spread to like various human cities, and then the Vermintide rises up from above, and it's like an apocalyptic event where the entire city is overwhelmed by giant ratmen. Vermintide, the games are set during a Vermintide. You know, it's cool. I love it
It's
so
during the
much.
end times as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, like I like that a lot. I don't know. I just like this image of rat men. It's disgusting and horrifying and cool, in my opinion.
No,
Plus, they're the only race to have contacted the Eldar in
Oh yeah,
Warhammer
yeah, yeah.
when they
Yeah.
accidentally built basically a giant radio transmitter because they were trying to listen in on the on like Teclis and Tyrion's plan over in the Elven continent. They missed with their direction of the antenna and instead contacted a space elf Eldar craft world, uh, and were incredibly confused.
See, that would have been like that. That is why the creation of Age of Sigmar for me is so sad because they could have done so much with the connections. You know, like having the Skaven interact with the Eldar. They could have done anything. I mean, in the original lore, this was just one planet in the Warhammer 40K's world. The old ones created the same sort of thing, right? The orcs in fantasy were the same orcs as 40K, but that changed. So like, I feel like they let themselves down there personally. But yeah, you know, again, I don't think to them the story matters as much as selling mobs, little figures. Sadly.
yeah, well, I guess that we've covered pretty much, I think in some degree, almost touched on as much as we can of the wider Warhammer universe, including, you know, not just 40K, but also fantasy. And I think, you know, that's kind of what we wanted with this discussion, is to show that, you know, for the people who haven't engaged with any Warhammer content, like Aidan here, who sat and listened to us talk about all these things without much context, which I appreciate. But yeah, if there's anyone listening, I think definitely a world worth engaging in, and because it's so vast, you will find something in it which you enjoy. Like, they have so many different types of stories. They have heists, they have you know, spy thrillers, they have, you know, straight up war stories,
military sci-fi, horror. The horror is the best part for me personally.
Yeah, it's such an expansive world.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
the buddy book drama. It's been over 1,000 years, 10,000 years. Amazing book, well worth the read.
Yeah, the Infinite and Divine will give you a bit of sort of cosmic comedy, I guess, is the best way of putting it.
That's funny. That book is funny.
But yeah, I thank you guys for joining us for this, and you know, I hope Aidan will.
I mean,
not
I've
be
learned
too
a lot.
overwhelmed.
No, like you said, there was a lot to listen to, and that's why I've been quite quiet this episode. But it's captivated me. Like I will probably go and read stuff, you know, over the next few days, and you know, try and not catch up because I don't think I can. But definitely, you know, get my foot, you know, dip my toe in it. Sounds like there's a lot, and like you said, there's lots of different things to explore, you know, and there's some things that are to my taste. So yeah. Definitely really interesting, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Well,
What's next, by the way?
what is next?
Kick-Ass?
Kick-Ass. Yeah, I think we're discussing 2011 film Kick-Ass. So
When is that? Because I can definitely come to that.
I think that's next Tuesday. I think we're doing that.
Yeah,
Tuesday?
can we call it Tuesday?
Yeah.
I'm down. I need to rewatch that though.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and yeah, we'll hopefully see you next week for Kick-Ass.
Yeah.